welcome to, well, I guess we called it an economic summit, but welcome to Life Point Church. I'm going to introduce Pastor Christian to welcome you, and then we'll do some more introductions.
Thank you so much. Well, on behalf of Life Point Church, and I know Pastor Mike, of course, thank you so much for being here. We really appreciate it. We just really wanted to welcome you guys and say thank you so much for being a part of this. We're excited for everything that's going to come from some wonderful, wonderful guests. But before anything, we'd love to begin in prayer. So if you would just join me in prayer. Thank you, Lord, for this day. Thank you, God, for this time. God, thank you for each individual that has come here today. God, we know that you have them here for a reason. And Lord, I pray that that everything that is heard, God, that it is received, Lord, and that we would take it with wisdom and understanding, God, and that we would rely on you for no matter what it is, God, that we get to leave here with today. Lord, I pray that that your presence gets to be with us here in this moment, God, and that you would bring just amazing wisdom and understanding to not only the speakers, but to those who will be here getting to leave with it as well. Lord, we love you, we honor you, and we praise you. It's in your name we pray. Amen.
Now, Ben Walker, the current president of the Clarksville Home Builder Association.
Got a mic and everything, huh? Hey guys, I just want to welcome you for the Home Builders Association, and hope you get some good news today and enjoy this. I've heard it before, and Edsel does a great job, and that's it. My name's Ben Walker, president of the Home Builders Association.
Thank you, Ben. And now Jeff Burkhart with the legislative updates for the home building industry.
Thank you, sir. Thanks to everyone for coming. It looks like a great turnout. Special thanks to Karen, who kind of done this for us. She always goes beyond good and does great. Every time she does anything, we appreciate what she does for us. Legislatively, pretty quiet year on the Hill. Not a whole lot going on. But one of the problems we keep continually having is TDEC. TDEC is slow on permits. They're slow on septic tank permits. They're slow on subdivision approval, which means we're slow on delivering lots. So anything we can do, we're trying to get a meeting set up now with TDEC. We've had 3 set up, and each one of them's gotten canceled for different reasons. So if you have any issues, please let Karen know so we can try to address them, because we do have a meeting set up with the commissioner sometime in early August, and we want to, if you've got a special issue, we'd like to handle that while we're there. So anyway, appreciate you coming. Please, if you're not a member of the Home Builders, please join, because these hours today count towards your, if you're a new builder, these hours today count toward your keeping your license and your continuing education. So we're glad you're here, and I'll turn it back over to Mr. Beams.
Thank you, Nelson. My name's Nelson, by the way. I didn't tell y'all who I was. And I'm thankful that Mayor Durrett's here today, and when we started this off, he's been so helpful, and I'd like to open the floor to Mayor Durrett.
Thanks, Nelson. Good morning, everybody. I have a few people I want to thank, but before I do that, I just want to say I have 47 days left in my term. That's a blessing without a doubt. But it's truly been an honor to serve this community and the people that are in this room, whether you're in banking, whether you're in real estate, whether you're in construction, whatever. You are such a huge part of the engine that makes Montgomery County such a great place to live, work, and play. So I want to thank each and every one of you for what you do to fuel our economy each and every day and to make Montgomery County such a great place to be. And as I said, I'm not going to run again. For those of you that supported me, I really want to thank you. For those of you that didn't vote for me, Pastor Christian will be over here accepting your forgiveness of sins after the meeting. No, I'm kidding. I'm not through, Nelson. Yeah, this is one of my last times to get in front of people. And I'm not a big talker anyway. But Edsel, I want to thank you and Laurel. This thing started, I think, back in maybe 2017, 2018-ish. Yourself and I and Nelson and Jeff Truitt, who was chief of staff then, we had a breakfast meeting that morning. And I mean, I was just, you got my mind spinning so bad, and it's spun ever since then, just the wealth of information that you are. And I can't wait to hear really what y'all are going to tell us. And it's very, very exciting. Now, I want to thank Christian, Pastor Mike, obviously, Life Point Church for hosting the event, and Nelson to F&M. And I see Sammy back there and some other F&M folks. Thank y'all for just doing what y'all do in the community as a whole. And you're always in the front when it comes to community engagement, and we're just so blessed to have an institution like y'all. And I want to, two people I want to point out. I don't think there's any county commissioners here, but my new chief of staff, Lee Harrell. Lee, if you would stand up. If y'all got problems, see Lee after the meeting. He'll take care of all of them for you. And I want to recognize my great friend, the city mayor, Joe Pitts. Mayor Pitts, if you would stand up. Thank you, and we appreciate your service. And lastly, again, I just want to say to each and every one of you, thank you. It is a blessing to serve in this community, and I look forward to hearing Edsel from you and Laurel. And I think Laurel's going to go first, but I'm going to give it back to Nelson. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Mayor. We're so thankful for the way you serve this community, and hope you're not through. But I know it's a lot. We're thankful for you, and thank you to Karen and Deb with the realtors. Karen with the home builders, and Deb with the realtors car for helping organize this. This has been a wonderful thing, and I do want to introduce Laurel Groffey. She's the Vice President and Regional Executive, Nashville branch of the Federal Reserve Bank. I think for 17 years. When you were 12. You started there. She is a leader. This is what her LinkedIn site says. A leader, a listener, and an economist, which is great. Shouldn't we all be listening leaders? So I want to introduce Laura Groffey. I'm not going to say much about anything else, but thank you very much for coming.
Well, thank you so much for inviting me to join you this morning. There are a lot of important, I think, listeners and thinkers and leaders in this room. So it's always an honor to get to be a part of the conversation. There's a lot to talk about. Even an hour I tend to think of as a pretty long time to talk about the economy. And right now it's like we can only scratch the surface. So my thinking for this morning is that my portion would be more of a discussion. So I'm not here with an agenda I'm trying to push, but I want to be sure we have a conversation that addresses what are the concerns on your minds, what are the things that feel most important to you to understand about, to share about, to connect. So for this first, I guess we have 45 minutes or so, please, raise your hand, throw something my way. Is there something I'm saying that's unclear? Am I missing something important that you think we need to touch on? Do you think I have a story wrong? I want to know that, and I suspect other folks in the room also would want to know that. So let's make this as much of a two-way dialogue as you're comfortable. So a little bit of context that I think is helpful for framing this discussion. I lead the Nashville office of the Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta. We have this very distributed regional structure. And so the perspective I'm bringing this morning is a perspective based on kind of the traditional stuff you would imagine an economist would bring. So we have PhD economists who are crunching numbers and looking at national statistics. So I'll show some slides because I can't help myself. We also have a team of survey folks, so we spend a lot of time getting insight from business executives and consumers across the economy. I'll bring some of that. But the part of my work that has been, I think, most influential at Federal Reserve policy conversations, and certainly most influential in my thinking over the past 2 years, is the time I spend out in the community talking one-on-one with business executives, community leaders, nonprofit leaders, to try to get insight not just about what is happening, but why, right? Because there's a lot that national data can tell us about how many jobs are being added, how many vacancies are there, what are home prices doing, but understanding who's driving that? What are the decision factors leading it? When folks are challenged, what are they doing about it? If you can't find the labor you need, what are the decisions you're considering and what are you choosing to do? And understanding that part of the story is absolutely critical in my view for all of us as leaders in the community, and I think certainly for policymakers at the Federal Reserve to be sure we're making the right decisions, not just based on some broad-brushed average of what's happening across the economy, but really gets deep into what's the why. What's the human story behind the data? And so I'll be touching on a little bit of that throughout the conversation. Since it's impossible for me to cover the whole economy, and Edsel knows, I get very excitable about these things. I thought maybe I would organize the discussion by making 4 observations. So when I sit back and think about what are the main things I think it's important to understand, to know? What are the main cases I would like to make about where we are in the economy in this exact moment? I think I have 4 main takeaways. And this is the first one. It is shocking to me how often I will sit down with a CEO, and the first thing they say to me is, so are we in a recession? When is a recession going to start? And I start getting really nervous. Oh my gosh, they're talking about a recession, and I'm writing, I'm underlining it, and it's in bold, and okay, this person's really concerned about a recession, and we talk about it, and then we move on, and I say, well, tell me, what are you seeing in your pipeline that makes you worried about a recession? And overwhelmingly, the majority of leaders say, oh, well, my pipeline's as strong as ever. I actually have record sales right now, and my expectation is that sales will at least remain this high for the coming year. Huh? Wait, tell me about the recession you brought up in the beginning of this conversation. And I think it's this really interesting moment where we are experiencing a dichotomy across the economy. We're also experiencing what I am concerned a little bit could be a national media narrative that could be bleeding into behavior in a way that might end up showing up in the economy before it necessarily even needs to. So one example is there's a big redistribution right now. So we all remember during the beginning of the pandemic, we weren't able to go out and consume services the way we typically could. We're not going to hotels or restaurants or traveling, so we cut back on that spending a lot, and that freed up a lot of our wealth to spend on renovating our homes and buying new computers and lots of athleisure. If you're anything like me, at least, lots of nice tops while I continued to wear my sweatpants to work for a couple of months. A lot of that's reversing, and it's actually showing up in businesses exactly the way you would expect. If you are a retailer who sells home furnishings, if you're in the business of organizing Zoom calls, you're probably seeing demand pull back right now because consumers are out and about engaging in summer travel, visiting family. Hotel rates are record high right now. Hotel occupancy is record high. People are out and about engaging in person. And so there's a little bit of a shift as some folks are experiencing the pain, especially, we see this in big public companies who had marked down, oh man, people are forever just going to be spending all their income at Target. I mean, I guess at some point, I didn't think it was possible, but maybe we kind of buy out Target at some point and have a little bit of extra money to go to restaurants and whatnot. And so a little bit of this redistribution is that there have been some really high-profile layoffs at big tech companies. For the most part, if you track what happens with those layoffs, those folks are almost immediately getting jobs with companies that have openings and are really eager to bring in tech talent. So despite the fact that there's this really broad national narrative about a recession, we're actually not seeing much of what would look like a traditional recession in the data. Is this too small to actually read? This always happens to me. I think you can see this. So this is a blue chip economic survey. It's a survey of the sort of top private forecasters in the country. And I will say this, Etzel might agree with me, Etzel might disagree with me. I would argue that if you take a constellation of the top forecasters in the economy, and you essentially take the median forecast at any given time, or some kind of critical center of the forecast, that is always going to outperform any individual forecast over a reasonable period of time. So I tend to, even though I'm in the business of economic forecasting, I think my forecast and my team's forecast is pretty good. I am always going to tell you, if I were to put money down, I would bet money on a blue chip forecast, on an average of professional forecasters over time versus any individual forecast, because statistically those just perform better. So this is a survey that folks completed July 11th, asking professional forecasters, do you think by removing monetary accommodation, central banks will be successful in slowing inflation without precipitating a recession? Interestingly, about half of people think no in this country. About half of professional forecasters say, look, in order to do what the Fed needs to do, or what the Fed will do to cool inflation, it's going to end up tipping us into a recessionary scenario. Interestingly, though, we are way more optimistic. These forecasters are much more optimistic about the US than about the Euro area or the UK, which we tend to think of as the closest proxy economies. And it's a similar story with the probability of a recession. What's the likelihood of a recession beginning this year in the US? 36%, according to this group, which is significantly lower than what we hear in the Euro area and globally. So there's a little bit, again, of a dichotomy, not just across industries, but across what we're seeing globally right now. And I think it is always important, despite the fact that I work with the central bank, and I like to think that monetary policy can solve all ills. It is helpful to be reminded that what we're experiencing today is truly a global phenomenon. That inflation pressures are incredibly high, that concerns about the way that's going to impact consumers and businesses, those are global challenges today. And I think here's the biggest thing that really has me question, could this really be a recession? Is this what a recession looks like now? I mean, maybe I'll take us back for a moment. Why do we care about GDP? So GDP is the main measure we use as economists to measure broad economic activity. It includes all of the goods and services produced in a given time in this country, everything. Services and goods, everything that happens. Why do we care about GDP growth? What's the deal about perpetual growth in GDP as the standard for economic success? Why does that matter? That's not actually a rhetorical question, but I'm not going to put you on the spot if you don't. I mean, it actually is, I think it is actually a fair question to ask. Like, is perpetual growth, is that a sustainable thing? What does it mean if GDP slows? Or heaven forbid, declines? Here's something. GDP is deeply imperfect, and I think in some ways a terrible proxy for the well-being of Americans. Insofar as some of the most powerful drivers of what happens with GDP are two things that don't necessarily have a lot to do with people thriving in the moment. One is inventory accumulation. So if businesses get a whole lot of inventories and don't sell them, that actually can look good for GDP. The other is net exports. So if we're buying more from abroad than folks abroad are buying from us, that's bad for GDP. But you can imagine a lot of scenarios when that might be happening, and it's actually maybe a good thing. Maybe it's a sign of a strong economy. Maybe it's a sign of a stronger U.S. economy than what's happening abroad. So it is actually a very fair question to ask, why are we measuring our success based on this broad, kind of mucky economic indicator? And it is because historically, over the history of kind of modern economics, GDP was as close of a proxy as we could get from a really broad perspective to how are people doing in the economy. So it actually tended to track really closely with things like happiness indicators and well-being indicators and indicators of democratic freedom and access to education and all of those sorts of things. But I think one important question that I've been sitting with recently is, as we see GDP potentially moving in a different direction than employment, as we see an employment market that is record hot still, near the record most tight we've ever seen the labor market, yet GDP just declined and is likely to decline again depending on what happens with inventories and net exports. But if you look at the real components, what are the real things happening in the economy? What's actually being produced and built? What are the services being sold in this quarter? Those things will be negative for the past quarter. We're not exactly sure what the final number will be because it's going to be swung around by exports probably. So we have GDP declining, we have company profits declining, but anybody who wants a job is able to find a job. And guess what? They're being paid better than they've ever been paid. So how should we think about how are we doing as a country? How's the economy doing as a country? This is a picture, if you can see the lines, the black line is labor demand, so that's the number of jobs plus the number of open, unfilled positions. The blue line is labor supply. That's just the workforce, people who are working or actively looking for a job. We're in the first period since this data began that we have a swap in the mismatch. We have become, as workers, as employers, as policymakers, we have become accustomed to the normal in the labor force being there is always more supply of labor than demand for labor. There are more people who want jobs than there are jobs. We have built our philosophies about what are the relationships between workers and their employees? How do we think about our own careers? How do we think about how benefits work in the economy? All of those things have been built in a context of a mismatch in the opposite direction of what we're experiencing right now. And there's a whole lot of kind of necessary change and discomfort likely that comes with this environment. And I think one important question I am sitting with right now, and I imagine a lot of you are sitting with right now, is, will this reverse? Is this a new normal? Or is this a temporary pandemic, something other sort of thing, period? Employment growth is, if we would have had even 1 month with the strength in employment growth that we saw last month, which we considered strong but a little bit of a cooling, it would have been gangbusters. Employment growth has been incredibly strong. People are flowing into the workforce, people are flowing into jobs, and claims for unemployment insurance are still incredibly low. We have never been near a start of a recession with so few people being laid off. There are about 2 jobs available for every unemployed job seeker. Wage growth, we all feel this. Wage growth has been rising and rising at much faster paces than we've been accustomed to in the past couple of decades. I'll get to this in a minute. It unfortunately, especially if you look at workers on the lower end of the income spectrum, at this point, wage growth has not kept up with inflation. So if you adjust wage growth for the pace of inflation, people's ability to maintain their lifestyle has actually backslid, despite the fact that that lower tier, that kind of lower income segment of the population has actually seen the biggest increase of any group in their kind of net worth and their earning power that we've ever seen. Okay, this one, I hope, did anyone see that? So here's one of my, Edsel's heard this one before. So I have so many conversations, and I have them with economists, but I mostly feel like I notice I have them out in the world, like I'm waiting in line to be seated at a restaurant, and the person behind me in line is like, ugh, this is taking so long. No one wants to work anymore. Or you're at the grocery store and you ask for help and no one comes, or whatever it is. There is a very powerful national narrative about what's causing the worker shortage. And I think we all have our own kind of pet theories that probably all have some truth to them. The no one wants to work anymore is one I hear a lot. But so I went to my team and said, hold on a second, we are data nerds. If anyone can do this, we can do this. This is what, we've prepared our lives for this moment. Where are the workers? Why do we have a labor shortage that we can't explain? No one wants to work anymore should be something that I can see in data, actually. That's not like a mysterious, fluffy thing. I can tell, where are people? So there are some stories that are a part of the national narrative that seem to be a lot more powerful than others. And there's one in particular. I'm picking on one demographic group. So I can actually statistically explain the entire difference between the labor force at the start of the pandemic and today. I can explain the entire decline in the labor force by behavior of one demographic group. Other behavior has changed. Other folks have changed. There's always a lot of movement. There's one group whose behavior has changed so much, I can actually point to them and say, this group single-handedly has shifted in such a way that if they went back to how they were behaving pre-pandemic, this labor shortage would be completely over. What group do you think that is? It's seniors. It's folks over the age of 55. So this is a picture of labor force participation. To participate in the labor force, you're either actively working for at least 1 hour of pay in the past 2 weeks, or you're actively looking for a job. And what I've done is I've indexed, so I've broken it down by 3 different age groups, and I've indexed it all to 100 at the start of the pandemic. So we can see what's the change in participation since the start of the pandemic. Prime age workers, I didn't come up with this term. This is a technical economic term. I'm not offending anyone. Workers between 25 and 54, who make up 63% of our entire labor force, their participation is still slightly below where it was pre-pandemic, but it's almost fully recovered. That's the orange line. Where we have seen participation decline and rather than recovering, continue to backslide is workers over 55. And there are actually 2 different effects happening here. There are 2 reasons why this is enough for me to point to this one demographic. One is a behavior change. So historically, if you look at the behavior of Americans as we age in terms of labor force participation, it has historically been incredibly predictable. This is not something that actually tends to change much. It was similar in the 70s and in the 80s and in the 90s and up to around 2007, 2008. And then something totally flipped. And I could guess, it is part of it that stock markets declined and folks felt less secure to retire and home prices declined and there was a wealth effect. Was it a cultural thing? I don't know. But we suddenly had this absolute break in the data that you couldn't predict, you couldn't align with any other historical period, where folks as they reached critical retirement ages, continued to work, continued to stick around. And it's funny, so I've been out having these conversations, as Nelson so kindly pointed out, for a minute now. And in 2015 or 16, I started to hear some really loud stories from employers saying it's especially employers that employ people in the trades, in nursing, in trucking, in construction, in technical fields or fields where you need a lot of experience, like really experienced engineers that need a lot of field experience, who said, look, we're not seeing it yet, but we are on the verge of a labor crisis in my industry because my workforce is aging and there is not a pipeline of people coming in to replace them. We're on the brink of something big. And I freaked out. And I went back to my colleagues at the Fed and I'm like, guys, there's going to be crazy labor shortages and crazy wage pressure any day now. These folks, they have already pushed back their retirement date. We can't keep counting on this. And I was wrong year after year after year after year because the new behavior stuck. People were sticking around. And in some ways, I like to think of it as we had a workforce, we had a whole economy that in some ways was being propped up, I want to almost say artificially, by this bonus workforce. So not only are these people we didn't expect, but think about it. These are the most experienced, in a lot of ways, the most productive members of our workforce. And they're sticking around in a way we never would have predicted. And then what happened? The pandemic. Behavior has almost perfectly, almost exactly reverted to what you would have predicted in 2005, in 2000, in 1995, in 1985, in 1975. People are behaving the way we historically have behaved around retirement decisions. So there's a behavior change. I've seen some news reports about are people flowing back into the workforce from retirement, having my team monitor that. There's some of it, but that has always been the case, and it doesn't seem like it's happening in any way that kind of doesn't match what you would expect historically. So there's a behavior change. There's also obviously a demographic change. We have just reached the point when there's a critical mass of the baby boomer generation moving into retirement eligibility. So it's not just that they're behaving differently than they were right before the pandemic. It's just a larger proportion of our population than we've ever seen. And to me, this is a really critical grounding. There are lots of other things happening in the workforce. I'm happy to talk about them. But I think as policymakers, as employers, as citizens, as we think about labor shortages and we think about what sorts of solutions might be necessary, I think it's really critical for us to have a really keen eye on who is it who's left. Who is it who we want to try to recruit back? Can we even recruit back? You know, there are a lot of folks who are near and dear in my life who have made the personal choice to retire. And it is hard for me to imagine that a work remote Friday or another $1 an hour is going to bring those folks back into the workforce. And so it begs a lot of questions about how can we be creative about filling the roles we have in the economy, perhaps with different faces, perhaps in different ways, perhaps structuring jobs differently than we have in the past. The one other thing I want to mention here, because I know this is a group that kind of thinks a lot about workforce development and policy solutions. I haven't heard as much of it recently. There was a little era earlier this year and last year where we talked a lot about the Great Resignation. There was a whole lot of attention paid to who's quitting their jobs. Lots and lots of people are quitting their jobs. Guess what? By far the number one thing for people to do after they quit their jobs. Get another job. So this I find really fascinating because I think a lot about workforce. I think a lot about our economy. What are the jobs of the future? What are the skills of the future? And We have been spending for decades enormous amounts of brain power and taxpayer dollars thinking about workforce development. How do we get people from dependency on government support to self-sufficiency? How do we get people to move up the career ladder, to get more relevant job skills, to be ready for the jobs of the future? And we spend a huge amount of resources on it, oftentimes with really limited success. It can really be difficult historically to shift people on a systemic level from a path of dependency on public resources to full self-sufficiency in a way that is really scalable and cost-effective. There are not very many examples of programs that have been able to do that on a large scale. And then the pandemic came. And I think in some ways we are suffering from the pain of having our own wish answered all too quickly. So by far the most likely person to quit their job during a pandemic is someone with a high school degree or less, someone who is in a relatively low-paying job, someone who is in a job that you often don't have the schedule very far in advance. It's an intermittent schedule. You're not home in a predictable way. And guess what kind of jobs those people are moving toward? Exactly the kind we designed all these fancy workforce programs to try to shift people into. People are moving to roles where they can be home to make dinner in the evening. They're moving to roles where their employers are investing in education and apprenticeship and career development. They're moving to roles with more predictability. There was a fabulous story. Are you familiar with Conexión Americas? There's a nonprofit in Nashville that works with Hispanic workers. And there was a fabulous anecdote that Jose Gonzalez, who was their interim leader, shared a couple of weeks ago that I thought captured this story so well. It's just one example, but I thought it was such a good one. There was, up by Opryland, there's a very large community of Hispanic workers. And it's like a multi-generational community where folks are tied to two industries. And almost without exception, the women in the community work in hospitality and the men in the community work in construction. And it is set up in such a structured way, like there are buses there every morning to transport people to work. There are big structures. Employers go, they know who they can recruit out of this community. The beginning of the pandemic, hotels had to shutter. But construction is an essential activity. So construction workers still had jobs. And there was this really interesting shift where a very large group of women from the community who were now left without work, who were accustomed to jobs that paid around $11 or $12 an hour, that were often intermittent. So you would work 8 hours a day, but it wouldn't be a contiguous 8 hours. You'd work 2 hours, and then you'd go home, and then you'd work another 3 hours, and you'd go home, and then at midnight you'd have to go back again to try to meet the demand, to clean hotel rooms or to kind of set up things in the kitchen or whatever it might be. So suddenly there were opportunities to do things like Jose described it as kind of light construction work, so things like painting crews, so physical but not the most physical work in construction crews. And even at the beginning of the pandemic, these jobs were already paying $17, $18, $19 an hour. They were all contiguous hours. It was during the school day, so you could be home in the evening to be with your kids. And you also knew you had those hours in advance. I know this week what my hours will be next week. So there was a huge jump over. And guess what? When hotels could open back up, guess who told me no one wants to work anymore? And I think this is part of the broader challenge, and I say that in jest. It's part of the broader challenge we really are collectively having as a community and as an economy. There are some jobs that we rely on that are just really hard. Driving a truck across the country is a really hard job. Working in a not temperature controlled warehouse, the night shift, is a hard job. Physical labor outside all day, those are really hard jobs. And as we have a surplus of job availability and not enough workers, we're seeing workers filter themselves into roles that work better, that are easier for their lifestyle, whatever that might be. And those are not historically jobs that pay less than the really hard jobs. And I think this is part of the reckoning. We all have a collective stake in this. I need the things that I order to show up at my house. I need the food to be delivered to the grocery store. I need the structures to be built. I need all of these things to happen as a stakeholder in this community. And I also recognize these are hard jobs. And I recognize that we have a huge swath of the population opting into jobs that to them are more appealing, to them offer more opportunity, to them work better with a lifestyle they have envisioned. And this is the part that I can kind of take the easy out at the Fed and say, okay, well, my job is interest rates, and I feel like your job collectively, our job, is to think about, what do we want the economy to look like? What do we want our kids' opportunities to look like? And if there are jobs that are really hard, are there ways for us to support higher pay for those? Are we willing to pay more for those goods and services to support higher pay? Are there ways we can automate? Are there ways we can think about bringing more? And I will say Tennessee has done a fabulous job of this. I mean, bringing more credibility and clout and really telling the story of how some of these trades roles can create long-term stable lifestyles in a way that other roles often can't. But it is something that I think sitting back and saying the problem is people are lazy has us missing out on a really opportunity to shape a solution of what we want our workforce to look like. I spent way too long on labor force. There's a lot interesting happening in the labor force right now. There's also a lot interesting happening with inflation. I was expecting a disappointing inflation report yesterday, and even my most pessimistic staff member was surprised by what a tough report that was. So one way I think about inflation, something that I think is really challenging in my business of looking at statistics is when I give you an inflation number, that is an average of how we all experience inflation across the economy. But your personal experience of inflation is going to depend on your lifestyle, where you live. Are you a parent? Do you own or rent your home? How far is your work away from your house? Do you like to cook or do you go out to eat? All of these actual behaviors end up really shifting what is our personal experience of inflation. And so one statistic that I find to be really helpful is asking my team, is this inflation number being caused by can we chalk it up to some blips? Is it just energy prices because of the conflict in Ukraine? Is it just auto prices because of chip shortages? Is it just these really specific areas, or is this something that's starting to permeate across the economy? And so how the consumer price inflation is calculated in the U.S. Is a measure of the change in prices of goods and services of the average basket of the consumer in this country, which you can imagine includes a lot of goods and services. There's haircuts and bananas and healthcare and home prices. There's a lot in here. This is the third time in history we've ever seen more than 75% of the items in the inflation basket, in the consumer basket, rising more than 75%. I'm sorry, rising more than 3%. Not more than 75%. which is an indicator that this is no longer something that we can say this is an unusual short-term pandemic blip. This is something that has become more entrenched and has spread its way through a much broader segment of the economy. In fact, the strength in GDP that we've been seeing, the strength in consumer spending, so the height of the bars represents nominal consumer spending. So what's the dollar amount in consumer spending growth each quarter since February 2019? The blue portion is quantity. How much of spending growth is because people are buying more goods and services? The orange portion is price. How much of spending growth looks strong because prices are going up, not because of quantity. And as we've gotten further into the recovery, consumer spending overwhelmingly has been driven by price effect rather than a meaningful, real increase in demand on goods and services. We also just saw in the past month, this is a Census Household Pulse survey. I wish we had more data than this, but they only started conducting this portion of the survey in late 2020. The red line is percent of adults in households where it's been somewhat or very difficult to pay for just usual household expenses in the past 7 days. This feels like an inflation story that's become very real. And I imagine a lot of folks in this room, we notice inflation, we notice prices at the gas pump, prices at the grocery store, airplane prices. We don't like it. But I suspect we are not in the situation that we are now seeing a lot of Americans move into, which is, I'm now having to choose. Am I getting enough food for my family, or am I going to keep the air conditioning on? And I think that, again, leads to this question about, this feels like a very unusual recession in that when you look at the upper middle and upper income segments of the economy, people are still financially way better off than we've ever been. We're pretty grouchy, actually. We're pretty pessimistic. But if you look at our personal situation, if you look at our personal financial situation, and if you ask questions like, if you had an unexpected job loss or a big unexpected expense, what would that do? Folks aren't worried about themselves personally. If you look at the lower income tier, we are slipping into a situation pretty quickly that's starting to look really tough. I mean, we already have a lot of data about utilization at food banks and other food resources. We know that people are starting to wind down savings and utilizing payday lenders and other short-term lending capabilities. So some of this is coming back, and it's coming back very quickly. And I think, again, it gets to this question, and it certainly is a tough nut at the Federal Reserve for us to crack because we have one tool, and it's interest rates. And when you have experience of the economy that are diverging so significantly, how do we make those trade-off decisions? Inflation hurts. Inflation has to be brought under control, period. But we want to do it with as little harm as possible. What does that look like? What do we need to do to regain? In my view, it's regain, because I think we've lost some. These are my personal views. I'm not speaking on behalf of the Federal Reserve. Regain credibility, regain the public's trust that we're willing to do whatever it takes, even if it's politically unpopular, even if it upsets people. We are willing to do whatever it takes to get the U.S. back to a place where you can make decisions for your household, you can plan for your family without inflation feeling like something that's a drag on your ability to make decisions. But we don't want whatever it takes to be too much than what's needed. And there are as many opinions as you could possibly imagine about what's needed. And a lot of that depends on what sector are you in? What do you see on the economy? Which of these consumer groups are you most exposed to? Which of these industries do you talk to, do you feel most acutely? You tell me what your business is, you tell me where you live, who your customers are, I'm gonna have actually a pretty accurate guess of what you think. It's probably, I should say I was gonna say what the Fed should do, but maybe instead I'd say what the Fed is doing wrong. Which I think is healthy. I mean, it's healthy for us to think about it, it's healthy for us to talk about it, but it is a situation of heightened uncertainty for business leaders, and it certainly is heightened uncertainty and heightened divergence of views within the central bank. Because of course, each of us have our own backgrounds, have our own areas of expertise. You know, I've spent my career studying inflation. This is the place where I've spent my career, so I'm especially jumpy about inflation. I want to zip through this because Etzel's next, and I do not want to take 1 second of his time. So there is a policy meeting coming up the week after next week where the Federal Open Market Committee, the Fed's policy setting body, will meet again about interest rates. Markets, after yesterday's CPI release, markets really pushed up their expectations for a larger increase. We're currently targeting a Fed funds rate at a range between 1.5% and 1.75%. I don't think there is any market expectation. I think that's right. I think there is maybe a 0% probability, or basically statistically no different than 0% probability that the Fed will not increase interest rates. I think the question now is just how much. And even I personally, as someone who you can imagine has a lot of opinions about this inside the organization, I am not even clear yet what I will support, because the economy is evolving so quickly and there is such different information that I think it is critical when that time comes, we are using the very most up-to-date information and the very most detailed data to help determine how do we try to steer this ship in a way that is least disruptive while still having the very significant impact that we know is absolutely necessary to get inflation back under control. I hope Edsel's presentation is a lot more uplifting than mine. I did not intend to come be a total bummer this morning, but there's a lot on my mind, and I suspect yours, and I think we have a couple minutes if there are any questions.
What does success look like for the Fed in 6 months or a year from now?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the number one metric of success is going to be inflation expectations. That the Fed's tools tend to work with a lag, right? You increase interest rates and it impacts the way that behavior filters through economic decision making to real sort of GDP types of activity, to what was going to show up in inflation statistics. Those things tend to happen with quite a lag. One of the things I skipped over and probably shouldn't have is inflation expectations. This is a little bit of a, Nelson described it as like your mind spinning. In many ways, inflation expectations can matter more than actual inflation. If we experience a temporary boost in prices, or we experience a boost in prices, but all of us collectively in the economy are sure that it's temporary, if I trust the central bank to get inflation back under control, I will behave as if the central bank will get inflation under control. If I don't trust that inflation will get under control, what am I going to do? I'm going to spend my money. If there's something I think I need a year from now, I'm going to go ahead and get it now because I think it's going to be more expensive a year from now. I'm going to try to look for safe assets. I'm going to invest in property, in hard assets, in metal commodities. I'm going to deploy my cash. I do not want to sit on cash that's going down in value. And what does it do when all of us behave that way? It drives up prices and it creates inflation. So in many ways, it is people's beliefs about inflation that are a much more important long-term predictor of where inflation is going than actual inflation today. So 6 months from now, I think success looks like these expectations from professional forecasters, from households, from businesses, these expectations have to come back down. We have to anchor them back where folks say, this was painful, prices are higher, prices may never go back down, but they will not continue to increase at this pace. And I'm willing to hold on to cash and wait for a good deal to come along. I'm willing to sit on some savings so I have an extra rainy day fund. I'm willing to keep money around that I could deploy in the future because I trust that it will be worth something in the future. I think that's critical success, and obviously I would love to get there in a way that is minimally disruptive. I think a lot of that's out of the Fed's hands, frankly. What ends up happening with the situation in Ukraine, the way employers decide to manage a situation of uncertainty like this, I think the Fed can be transparent. We can do our best to kind of moderate policy in a way that is clear. But I don't think there's a scenario that looks like success in 6 or 12 months where these numbers specifically don't come back into check. Yes? Yeah, it was the comment was about, I mentioned Ukraine, and what about kind of broader oil price trends here in our country? I mean, one thing is, I'm not going to weigh on kind of a specific administration's politics, but oil prices are a global phenomenon. I mean, we are going where the world is going. In fact, we have been insulated. There is one way that the U.S. has been really insulated from energy costs spiking because of the Ukraine situation, and it's because we do not have the capacity to liquefy and export natural gas in order to participate in the global economy. So the price of natural gas is way, way higher globally than it is in this country. And those two prices are going to converge, and guess where they will be converging? Up. And it will be converging up because the industry is investing in capacity to participate in the global market to be able to benefit from the higher global prices. So I would say in local investment in energy production is super complex. And one of the things, I mean, the Fed is apolitical. I am not going to weigh in on any political considerations. I will say, when you talk about long-term infrastructure like energy production, it's really hard to point to a single administration and give credit or blame to any particular outcome, because these investments are often, I mean, these are decade-long investments. So I have formed an energy advisory council that meets out of New Orleans a couple times a year. So it's, everyone from utilities to pipelines to fracking companies to deep sea folks, kind of it's refiners, everyone across the board. And so we've been in touch very frequently through this experience as I ask, okay, what's the industry doing? How is this current situation impacting the industry? And overwhelmingly, the insight I get is we make decisions based on our expectations for the pricing environment 10, 15, 20 years in the future. To increase capacity, I mean, this is not a small outlay. We're not just dialing up some kind of lever. This is a huge, long-term, multi-decade investment. And right now, oil futures prices are and have been throughout this experience suggesting that oil prices are going to go back down. And so the insight I hear from industry leaders is still, I mean, obviously they always point out how some lower regulations would kind of ease up on some of the costs they face. But overwhelmingly, when I talk about capacity to increase production, I am still hearing we are happy to benefit from these higher prices right now, but it's too risky for us to invest in significant infrastructure to produce oil that when prices go down is no longer going to be profitable for us. I don't want to do it as an industry executive, and my board isn't tolerating me doing it because the time horizon is just so different. It's so different than say a service provider where you can just hire up people and produce more. These are kind of massive investments, and mind you, they're investments that involve a lot of steel, a lot of hard commodity components, a lot of skilled labor, a lot of these things that we know are expensive and in short supply now. So in order to ramp up oil production, you need to invest more than ever for each additional barrel of oil per day that you want to produce. It's going to take longer than ever for that to get to market, and it is going to be economically unviable for your company if prices go back anywhere near where they were pre-pandemic. So there's some complexity. I know there are. I am not a sort of global energy specialist in terms of the geopolitics of is there something the administration has done or should be doing to help ease these pressures. I know there are a lot of bright folks, and you perhaps know more than I do about that. But I think this is an area that can be, you get into kind of really complex decision factors because there are short-term pressures and the solutions are all very, very long-term solutions. And the mismatch there can sometimes prompt behavior that's really different than you would expect, just looking at the prices today. Okay, I'm going to hang out afterwards to chat, but I want to hear from Etzel. I know you want to hear from Etzel. You also may appreciate that he and I are twins today. We did not even plan that. But I will gladly, I don't know if Nelson wants to. Etzel is an incredible friend and mentor, and I have been having the pleasure of playing with him and seeing his fancy scrolling. I don't know if you're doing it today. I was talking to him like 12 years ago. We did our first road show together, and he knew how to do stuff with computers I had not even imagined. Like I'd only seen it in sci-fi movies, and now he has a very fancy thing in a pen. So I'm sure we're up for a very good show. Thanks for hanging.
So I've watched over the years the Federal Reserve, and I noticed that they tend to pick an economist to run an area that matches. For instance, in Detroit, you need somebody who understands automobiles. Out in the West, you need somebody who's familiar with agriculture. But her expertise is in inflation. And I've never heard a conversation like you just did that dealt with that very complex issue. My goodness, that was really rich. I really appreciate it, Laurel, okay? So we have known each other for a long time, and I just absolutely love her to death. I just think the world of her, honest. So I'm going to put this back. When we did the presentation one time in Franklin, I watched her moving like she does, not too bad today, but 80 feet back and forth. And I thought, God, this woman's an evangelist. I was waiting for an altar call. I hope I can put this in here. And I'm going to try to see if I can't pull this out now and get this moved around here just for a second. And so if you'll bear with me just now, I'm going to do something different. And I'm going to walk you through a logic I honestly believe we've discovered something that is absolutely nuts. Let me tell you about Montgomery County. We physically pull all the courthouse records of all the plats every 4 months, and we go and drive and count all the subdivisions every 4 months. We've been doing that here for many, many years, 20 years, a long time. Been doing Nashville proper for 27 years. Paula, is it probably right? Something like that. It's just a long, long time. So our approach to doing things is not to use anybody government detail, but it's to do something different. You know what I think what I might do is I might start with something else here, if I could do that, and I might actually do with Montgomery County, because I want to go back and deal with something besides just the data from Montgomery County. I'm going to do that. Got these cute little colored charts and all that stuff. But I want to. This is actually a page up here. You'll notice the United States is in the bottom right-hand corner. I used to draw the United States longhand, and by the time I got through, it looked like Texas had hemorrhoids. So they wouldn't let me do it anymore. So they put that down there so I can scribble and make it look good. Let me walk you through what's going on, because and I want to go back 4 recessions back. There's a definite advantage of getting old like me, but there's also a problem getting old, you know? I've decided this morning, told my wife, we're doing away with mornings. We're going to start at noon from now on. Let me walk through and show you this. If you come back, and I'm going to go a little quick initially, if you come back and look at this whole housing thing, it got to the place when COVID came on, historically, we were like this, that the existing home market. Now remember, I'm not dealing with the existing homes. I'm only new construction. But I have to walk through a series of steps. Some of you have heard a little bit of this, some brand new stuff even in the last week here. Existing homes tend to get about 2/3 of all homes that are sold, and new construction tends to get about 1/3. That's not true, and yet it's substantially true. It varies by counties, it varies by markets. It is quite substantially true. Well, if you come back and find out what happened when COVID came, well, people were afraid to list their doggone house. Look at Williamson County, went from 1,864 listings, and in 1 year it dropped 1,000 listings. People are afraid to list a house. Somebody's going to come in that's sick, and they're going to get COVID and all of that. Well, this existing home sales thing went to 1/3 of all homes sold, and 2/3 were being sold by new construction. So is that going to stay that way? Of course it's not going to stay that way. It's going back to what? It's going back to 2/3 and 1/3. That's what's coming. How's that going to get there? Well, I watched the listings, see if they were going back up, and they were sell real quick, and we had such a shortage of inventory on the existing home side that we would find people come in, and there were multiple offers on homes. I had one in 3 days, they had 43 offers. And almost all of them, except for a few, were above the asking price. All of that insanity is going now and disappearing. We're just trending back to what's normal. Well, we had the first variant, and then we had the second variant, and we were going to list, and we didn't list, and we changed our mind. And where are we at now? Well, we're at the monkey curve, whatever these crazy people are saying it is. I've gotten to the place where I think that the United States public don't give a crap no more. I just think they don't care. I know that, I think they're saying to Fauci guy, whatever his name is, I was there and said, well, just go on and do what you do. It's okay, son, but we're just going to go and live now. We need to go back to living, but you can go on and do all the prognostication you want. And what happens next? He got the COVID. So here where we at, and I'm not rejoicing, I'm just telling you. So I think we're in this curve. Here's this curve, and what is this curve? This curve is existing home listings coming back. And I think that we're going to see it's going to be about 95% back, probably at the end of 2023, And we will be back to full over here of 2/3 listings. I don't care what they say. We are moving back to that normal part. It's going to make a significant change when builders who are getting 2/3 of all the homes sold now are going to go back to 1/3 that they used to have. He said, well, no, things are not, no, you can tell me all you want. It's going back there. You might as well just accept that fact. Let me tell you the second thing that is going on. We have this transfer market that's here. And again, they put this little United States thing here so I would look like a dummy. And the reason I put that on here, the transfer market, people moving in from out of state, there's two levels of that. There's a level that goes across the country like this, and there's another level that goes across the country like this. And this top one here is from Richmond, Virginia, and then it's kind of Indianapolis back over here. And what I'm seeing is that we've got the people up here. Sure, there's some that are selling their house and moving and quitting their jobs. I understand that. And there's some retirees who understand that. But there's a lot of them that have moved from up in the Northeast back to places like Richmond where it's safer and all of that and whatever, and less danger and less taxes and whatever reasons. And they're keeping their job up north. For instance, in Chicago, they're doing that all the way to Indianapolis. We do the Indianapolis market, and there is a movement of a lot of people that moved our families and working from home out of Indianapolis. And if they have a corporate meeting in Indianapolis, they will leave about 6 in the morning, you see, where all the crooks are still sleeping and the thieves are still sleeping. And they'll get to the corporate meeting and they'll get out of there by 2, 3, 4 o'clock in the afternoon so they can get out of Chicago before it gets dark. And you say, well, that's not really true. No, you're just being difficult. No, I'm not, actually. And so what they'll do is they're living in Indianapolis. There's a fair amount. How much of that has happened? It's not major. It's about 5% more than historically people would transfer in. It's about a 5% increase. That is not going to go back to where it was. In other words, this increase of 5% of transfer in market in that line over and above what it had before, that's staying. There's another line right here that works from Charleston, South Carolina, all the way to Greensboro, North Carolina, that kind of that range up and down, to Knoxville, to Nashville, to Memphis, Kansas City, sort of that line across the country, and that's up between 15% to 35%. That's not going to stay there. Their people are moving now. They're not just going back to, they've quit their job, they're moved. And so what does that mean? It's not going to stay, it's going back. How far back? Listen, it's not going to go back to where it was, and it's not going to stay where it is. And nobody knows how much it's going to go back, but let me guess, as I have a feeling it's about halfway. So if you're up 20% now as a city area in transfer in market, and even it's different between Wilson County or going up into Williamson County, Rutherford, it's different. The transfer market's different. But if you're up 20%, it's going to go back to 10. If it's up 30%, it's going to go back to 15. It's up 15 to 35 now. So you're not going to see that go down. But who's going to get affected by that? It's going to be the builders that are building over 425,000 homes, over 500, a lot of them. They're the ones that are going to get affected. And so let me just see if I can't do this. I'm going to leave that right here and put this back. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take now and go to number 3. Let me put this back on here. Didn't mean to do that. Number 3. What we have at number 3 is a single-family detached rental program. We have a real, I was just putting on at a convention a while back in the Florida Panhandle with the lead economist from the National Association of Home Builders, Robert Dietz. We were out for dinner the night before, and I said, Robert, I said, do you know that prior, 20 years ago, the only time you saw a single-family detached rental is when we had a builder that couldn't sell his house, and he went ahead and rent the house out. And so, but 10 years ago, we had about 0.5% single-family detached rentals, and it kept growing. About 5 years ago, we had somewhere about 2.5%. It continued to grow. We just came off of having pretty close to 6.5%. And I know it's a little scribbly here, but you bear with me. I think we're settling down to 7% as the nation of all housing starts are single-family detached rentals. And these are under $425,000 homes, where the other one was over that price. This is under that price. And I think that it's stabilizing. It's not going up no more. I think the nation could support 8 to 9%, but I don't believe that we're headed there. I think we're going to settle down at 7. What happens when they go to sell these things? There's two groups that are out there buying and selling single-family detached rentals. About 30% of the market falls to regular kind of investors that do apartment complexes and all of that. There's about, and I'm not going to talk about that. They keep those houses 5 years, by the way, and then they flip them. The 70% are investors like you, or a couple doctors, or dentists, or realtors, or somebody comes in from Kansas City that sells trim and windows and doors and stuff. You know, something like that, see. And so 70% are that kind of people. They hang on to those houses 10 years. What do they do when they sell them? What they do when they sell them, they take those houses and they bring them over here and they put them right here. And he said, well, there's existing homes now. No, don't believe that junk. What you have now is a new industry. We have a new industry. And that new industry is getting 7% of all the housing starts in the nation. If that industry didn't exist, you'd have a lot easier time buying windows and doors and trim and cord around, right, Greg? I mean, you'd have a whole lot easier time if that industry wasn't there. But it's here to stay. It ain't going nowhere. And so what you have is when it's brought over here, it's going to become a new form of existing homes. They're not going to remodel them and then sell them, because if they're going to remodel them, they may as well keep them. They hang on to these houses 10 years because that's the time they have to start fixing them. And then they dump them, walk away, and replace them. And so you have a whole bunch of homes that are coming. When is it going to show? When we get back to 2/3 full availability of existing home product, and we're full in new construction, all of a sudden what shows up? A whole new bunch of houses that are being put on the marketplace that are competition. Now, we're building today tomorrow's competition already. And that's going to put downward pressure on the existing home market, and that's going to put downward pressure on the new construction market. And then we're going to come along and replace these sucker houses, and we're going to put upward pressure on costs, and it's going to affect builder profitability. I'm convinced that builders will make 20% less profitability in about 2.5 years than they would normally make 2.5 years from now, when things get back to normal and you have to sell a house price competitively. That's happening right now, right? That's happening now. You could get anything you want a year ago. That's not true anymore. Almost already, within a year it'll be different. This whole change is all taking place right now. There is a bunch of stuff that is going on. And I think that we have to be really, really conscious of this thing. My goodness. What is the next one? The next one, this was number 3. What about number 4? It is interest rates. You can go back to 1970, 1980. You know what the interest rate that shut the housing market down? It was 7 7/8 to 8% for 30-year mortgages. Now, I know you millennials in here, when you hear that, you pass out. So if they start to faint, grab them. But that was a shutdown rate. We were comfortable till almost 8% for 30-year mortgages. I have it all charted by month since 1971, okay? When you got to 8 and 8, it was over with for 30-year mortgages. There was another time back in the middle 90s where we had a 6 1/4 shutdown rate. Let me just tell you what happened in the last go-round. We got to the place, and it's such a mess up here. I had hit the wrong button, so I saved this dumb thing by mistake. So you bear with me. I'm going to take a little bit of space off of here and see if I can clean this up just a little. to go back here. If you go back to 2009, 10, 11, 12, I just went back and we recreated these charts to find out what was the shutdown rate that the financial world tried to push the money, but they couldn't get the public to agree to it. And I'll tell you what it was. It was 6.1% for 30-year mortgages. So what they would do, they push it up, and boom, it had to come to 6.1. They push it up back to 6.1, push it up back to 6.1, push it back to 6.1. So they just couldn't get it up no more because the world, the people said, stuff it. We're just not playing the game. I appreciate what you want to get the rate to. We're not going to play the game. And 6.1 became the bump rate that was shutting that doggone thing down. What's the fifth one? The fifth one is this thing on inflation that is becoming a real bugger. And I want to show you an interesting chart that'll help you. I'm going to pass on this one right here. This right here is the growth of money supply that we watch. And of course, I look at it, Laurel, from a different perspective, right? I've got that home builder's eyes. And so she said, every industry has a little different perspective. A while ago, I thought, yes, I got this narrow perspective that I'm talking from. But here's how it should have went. Well, Trump came along, Uncle Trump, right? And he was talked into putting out some free money. I've always concluded that if there's no gross domestic product at the end of the free money, that probably is going to be inflation. That's like military. I think giving money to Ukraine is directed at inflation. I just really believe that. So what we have is we had Trump and Biden, and they did this. Isn't that slick? That's really slick stuff. Never happened all the way through here. I mean, it's not that we didn't have some problems, but they did that. So I tried to figure out, I was on vacation, my wife and I, one day, and I thought, can I put down on a piece of paper what I have personally experienced from the home building industry perspective, right, Rob? From the home build perspective. And I've concluded, right or wrong, that if you take a time period, I'm going to just take 1970 to 1980, which is what everybody talks about now. This is the worst it's been in the last 40 years, that kind of thing. And I'm going to do it by year. I'm an average. Well, the growth of money supply was 9% average by year. And if you take off gross domestic product, which Lord did a wonderful job explaining, the complexities to that, and I agree. So if you take minus, take it off, subtract, it was 2.8%, by the way. That was the average for that 10-year time frame. And that will equal the inflation rate. The inflation rate average, by the way, for that time was 7%. Well, but that don't show up right away. I think what it messes with some of these politicians and drives them nuts, it could show up in 9 to 18 and 27. It doesn't show up right away, all of it. It's not as simple as I'm making it out to be, I'll promise you. If I took the decimal out of here, 9 minus 2 is 7. In other words, 9% growth in money supply, less gross domestic product equals inflation rate. It's not that simple. But I really like that a lot, actually. For me, I can explain it pretty easily, see. So Laurel in the Federal Reserve, you see, has been trying to keep 2% growth. And I watched and I thought, now remember, this is months and months and months ago I did this. I mean, it might have been a year almost. Not quite. And I tried to myself, how does this work? Well, if you have inflation, the solution, like you mentioned, let me go back to you, way back. 3 or 4 recessions. What happens was, generally the politicians, they are good at screwing up an economy. What they do is they just give all this money out and then they throw it all in a rat hole and they spend it for nothing. And next thing you know, you got inflation and they say, wonder where that came from. It came from the dummies. That's where it came from, see. I mean, if you were trying to define stupid, I could find a way of defining stupid for you. Of course, all the politicians in Montgomery County don't count. I'm not talking about them. Right, Jim? I'm going to be a little careful here. So, but here, if you go back in history, what happens historically? The Federal Reserve finds himself in an awkward position of having to print the stupid money, and then inflation comes. So they said, well, how are we going to control that? And Laura made the comment, it's true. Absolutely true, as she said. They have one tool, and that's interest rates. So they got to jack the rates up. What's the goal? The goal is to get unemployment, basically. I really believe that. You lay people off. So the home building industry has always been the first one, because the minute you raise rates, it puts them in the tank. Automatically, it puts them in the tank. Let me go back here and see if I can get a little bit of the white space to draw you a picture of how it works. Let's make believe this is the Federal Reserve. Then I'm not going to pick on the Fed at all. I'm not doing that. I would never even think of it. But I'm serious. And here's what the home builders are doing. The home builders are building full amount of production. In all these recessions in the past, because it's part of the solution to one of the questions that Laura raised, and let me show it to you in a minute. So what happens historically, the Fed, which is here, has no choice, and they raise rates. What happens right away? Sales go down. Well, the builders who are building at full production, like right now, are right here, and immediately they're overbuilding. Immediately they're overbuilding. They go from raising the rates, lowering sales, and the builders who are here, they're overbuilding, like right now. What do? And they panic. And right away there's layoffs. I'm talking about in 3 weeks. From the time they do this, the builders are already nervous. They already know got a potential problem. They're hearing some hassles, especially if they raise the rates 3/4 of a point like they did this last go-round. I thought that was really strong. I'm hoping this next round here is a 1/2 point. From the home builder's perspective now, because I think that we're at a crisis coming in, potentially right here. So historically, this is what this is, comes like this. That's not what's going on today. And that's what everybody's saying. We had this, it's a different kind of thing. And I had more guys trying to figure out what is going on. And I'll tell you why you're not experiencing some of the things you would normally experience. Let's take us over here, and let me draw a line here. Now remember, I'm just using a white space to scribble. Normally I got my cute little charts, and I don't do all this much, but today I'm doing this much in front of you. So what happens when sales come off, the builders who are down here with inventory, they're not up here. They're way down here. And so they build back the inventory. Sales come down, inventory goes up, inventory, sales down. Up, and so where's it headed? It's going to intersect. I honestly believe that the reduction in sales and the increase in inventory meet. And it's wonderful for you. And so normally when something goes wrong, look, we're the second largest research company in the United States. When something goes wrong, I'm getting calls. When COVID hit, I had 2 or 2.5 days. It's all I did, return calls. I'm talking about heads of major corporations all over, varying industries. What's going to happen? What's going to happen? In all this? Today, if we had been in another recession, I would have been inundated with calls about, do we have to lay off people because we're up here with production? I get no calls today. I've had not one call, any one discussion about laying off anybody. I have no call. But that's the solution, you see. Raise the rates, increase unemployment, get a hold of inflation. I mean, I know it's pretty basic, but that's the bottom line. That is not going on. The home building industry is not helping the Federal Reserve, if you will. They're not helping. As an industry nationwide, we're not participating. We are forced to participate in lower sales, but there's actually some relief and some of the builders I talked to. So where's this going? Well, let me just put some numbers up here for you. To watch me here. It's really, really important. I'm going to come back over here and say, of all the homes under construction, you need to have 24 to 28% of everything going, sitting there, finished, unoccupied on any given day. If you're under 24%, you are underbuilding. That's where we're down here right now. We were at 12.8. We went to 13.1. And by the end of this month, I'm expecting 14%. If you're under 24%, you're underbuilt. If you're over 28, you're overbuilding. You have to get to 32% of everything going in new construction sitting there finished, unoccupied on any given day in order to have it called a recession. And not just one time, it has to be there for over 4 months, for 8 months, because there's times we bump and we come off and we bump, we go down. And so 32%. Where are we at? We're at 14. So we've been watching this thing come down. We're here, and now we have to watch it go back. And so what does that mean? What does that mean? Let me take us back to this chart right over here and show you. This is actually the United States. If you go back to June of, let me just put this back on, I'm sorry. And I'll put right here. If you go back to June 14, 2014, we were here. This is the recession level. But we were coming down, and we're straightening out from that 2009, 10, 11 fiasco. And then it came back here, and by 15, we were down. By 16, we were back within the range. Here's the range. 24 to 28% is the optimum range, what you want to be at. This right here is overbuilding. This is recession. This is under here is underbuilding. It kept dropping down, and by the time we rolled around to 2019, was a little bump here for other reasons, and then it came back here, and by 21, we had dropped. And now I'm doing it by the month. These are by year, so it's a little bit erratic. But now by month, and we just bottomed here just 2 months ago at 12, just better than 12%. Finished unoccupied homes. Remember, I need 24 to 28. We've come back up here. This is 13.1. I think we're going to end up, this is July, I think we end up a little bit above that in July. We're going to be able to tell by month, what's coming and how we're coming back. Now remember, I don't mind this thing going up, because as you lower sales, it's going to push back up. And how long is it going to take to get to where? To the bottom of what's needed as the minimum amount of inventory. You're going to have to go from, 14% here to 24% just to get back to where you need to be. This is somebody says, well, we are overbuilding. No, don't believe that junk. This is not some government number here. We are hand counting all these subdivisions and all these states we're in. Not quite half the country. We're counting subdivisions. In Tennessee, we are doing all of Knoxville, Nashville, Memphis, Chattanooga. We are standing in the front yard hand counting 72%. Standing in 72% of the whole state of Tennessee every 4 months. So you want to talk about knowing the number now. I'm just telling you, this newly finished unoccupied number has turned out to be an absolutely killer number for knowing what the heck's going on. So what if we get back? How long is it going to take to get from where we're at just to the bottom of the better inventory range that we need? Is it going to happen in 2-3 months? Don't believe that junk. Now, if the Fed raises the rates 3/4 of a point, it'll accelerate the going back up a little bit. What happens to get it to here? My goodness, how long just to get to overbuilding? Right there, that orange line is overbuilding. How long is it going to take to get there? That's 28%. We're at 14. We have to, listen to this, we have to increase the finished unoccupied new homes in all the United States by 120%. from where it's at today, just to get to the place we're in the early stages of overbuilding. So now, that didn't happen in the past, right? Remember I showed you? We were always building over here. And when the Fed had no choice, the Fed had no choice, raise the rates, sales come off, we were already overbuilding. Right away, we were called overbuilding. But today, it's because of COVID, because there has not been able to keep the inventory in the ground. D.R. Horton told me a while back, Danny in town, I really like this guy a lot. He said that they had over 1,000, not over much, just a little bit right at 1,000 names on the list ready to sign contracts. This was like 4 months ago. I have others around town. And so what is it going to take to get to recession? Well, I don't know. It's going to take a lot to get to recession. My goodness, and we're going to have to go way back up to here. So you have to, listen, let me tell you what you've got. Somehow you've been cut some slack in life. Every time in other recessions, you didn't have no time to hardly think about it. And you have to lay people up, and you're scrambling, and you're taking longer to close your homes, longer to build them, harder to sell, and all of that. Now your sales will slow down, but your inventory is not there. And for guys that are selling windows and doors and trim like Greg right here, right? Yeah. He just happens to be married to my daughter over there. I'll tell you for sure. They are not in a spot where the builders can buy. They're not in a spot where the builders are going to have a hard time selling their spec homes. That is not the case today. That's why I have no builder coming and talking to me and say, what are we going to do? I have none doing that. That would be normal. So when the Fed raises the rates to get a hold of inflation and put the home building industry in the tank, because that's all what always happens that way. And then the rest of the nation kind of follows in the tank, want to straighten up the things and get the country going again, lower the interest rates, home building takes off, the rest of the country follows us out of the hole. And that's not quite that way, but it really is substantially true. It's not happening now because the home building industry is not helping. And it's confusing. It creates all of this crazy stuff that is going on. Let me just take you out of here. I'm not going to keep you a whole bunch, but I do want to talk to you about another particular chart that is really important for you to see. And let me just see if I can't take this off of here. I want to go back and show you another chart that we did, and I'll tell you what this is. We went back historically for years, back to January 1 of 1995, and took all of our cities. In fact, let me show you this. Let me not do that. What I'm going to do, get all sidetracked. Let me take here, and this is all of our metropolitan areas together, all these states. And the yellow right here, remember that 24 to 28%? That's that yellow. And so what happened with houses right here, homes under construction, finished. These are finished unoccupied houses. You can see they can bump. This is the recession line right here. They can bump it. But all of a sudden we knew way in advance that this was coming, and we went like this and came back down and went down here. This is the whole nation. Where are we at? We are here. We have never seen this level of low inventory as we got today. You say, well, no, you don't understand how many specs they got going, and they're not telling you. And please don't talk to me like that. There's a indicator, and that is when you see a house sitting there finished and occupied, it's a problem. Builders do not build houses to sit there finished unoccupied. They build them to close them. Now, that's not true with model homes, and maybe one little speck here and there is something to show. So when we track, this is finished unoccupied. When we see this starting to build, it's a problem. What does Nashville look like? This right here is Nashville. Look at here. It was a little bit more erratic, but it was very much shorter time span than if you looked at the whole nation. You see, here's the Nashville market. But we've come down and we bumped here, came down, and we're way down here, and we're now coming back, and it looks like we're going to start pushing in nearly that 17% number, which is, it could possibly push. Remember, nationwide, we're saying we're going to come into what, a 14 number? Nashville's pushing up. So there is this upward pressure to bring us back to where we were. Let me take us out of here again, and let me come back now. And I want to switch this out. Let me just take this out of here and come back. I want to come back. Let's see now. Where do I want to go? I want to go right back here. And I want to take you now. Remember, I showed you we had this growth that was taking place, and right in here, right here. And here's another chart that I've watched and how things have gone. This is also growth of money supply. I just tend to be a real bugger watching that number. And if we go back to 1970, 1980, I showed you the average. Remember, I said it was 9%. And if I subtract gross domestic product at 2.8, I'm pretty close to that 7% inflation number. But here's that time frame. We almost touched twice a 14% growth number. Even though the average for 10 years did come up to about 9, we bumped 14. And so it came down, and that the growth was here all the way through here. And then when this thing came back with Trump and with Biden, they started throwing all the money down a rat hole, and we bumped up here, and it came back down. I couldn't figure out why it came back down. And if you take a look at here, basically, we got it to the place where we had 24% growth. And so there was changes that were made and how it's accounted for, without getting into the detail of M1 and M2. But we were able to get it so that it is back over here, through here. I haven't ever seen this before. And to get it under control is not going to be easy. It's not going to be easy because they got this bump going on over here, which takes me back to here. I noticed that we want to try to keep a 2% inflation rate. I watched when it got to 6.4. You know what I was telling everybody on this chart? Way back now. I said, if you get to 6.4%, you're going to have to raise the 30-year mortgage rates to 4 3/4 to 5 1/4. That's going to come back and mess with the unemployment. It may not happen right away because of things Laurel's still talking about, but I'm saying it's coming, see? But it's going to take the home building industry and make the home building industry flat. Let me give you a shock. The home building industry in the United States was on a trajectory like this. It went flat. You know when it did that? Now, I'm talking about, look, it was growing, and it didn't go flat at 2019 levels. It went flat last year, in the summer of last year. In fact, Montgomery County actually came off starting in the summer of last year. You say, well, I got the numbers here. I can show you charts in a minute. But nationwide, we are flat. In some markets are up a little bit. Some markets are off a little bit. But it made a real strong turning corner. That's in sales and construction. It didn't start just lately here with the Fed raising rates. This thing had already started way back. And so what does that mean? When the inflation rate pushed, there's enough underlying pressure. When you start pushing the rates, inevitably you wind up at flat. And we're past that actually. Well, what happened, the inflation rate went up 6.8, and we found ourselves here. And I said, gee, you're going to have to raise the rates again. It's got to go higher than what I had anticipated. And it's going to push unemployment, the solution, right? It's going to affect home building, which we're there. And then I watched when it got to, 7.9, and then it went to 8.6, you see, and 9.1. Well, I think it's a little bit more than 9.1, actually. I think we're probably closer to 9.6, 9.7. I'm surprised at that. But here's our problem. We're in here with inflation. We're going to have to push the rates in here. It's going to affect unemployment. There'll come a place that will start to affect even home building. I want you to be careful of something now. Listen to me. it's the first time you didn't get your lunch handed to you, where they raised the rates, and all of a sudden you got stuck. And the home building industry gets crippled right away, overnight. You're not in that place. You got time to think about things. I think you've got 8 months, 9 months, 10 months, maybe even a year to get to some real stuff. I know there's a lot of people talking about we're in a recession and all that. I don't believe that at all. We're in a hole in the head. And I think that there's a lot of indicators out there that are telling us we're cresting in a lot of stuff. I really think so. The only problem I've got is this doggone thing with having to reach a certain rates of interest. You say, well, they'll just keep raising the rates. No, that ain't going to count. Because the people are not going to go play the game. Let me show you. If we come along in here and you say, well, they're at 9.1, okay? Just pick that. And I'm saying, you're way over here, just that means you're going to have interest rates jump into the sevens. There's no chance. The public has proven to me that when we hit 6.1, 4 different times, it was a barrier. You could just see the pulling down, up, pull down. The financial world couldn't get it up because the market was said, no, we're not going to pay it. I really believe that today, to get to 6% is going to be a doable thing, but it's going to be off in sales to a degree. But to get to 6.25%, I'm getting nervous. At 6.5%, I think that you're going to be off quite a bit at 6.5%. For somebody to tell me the market's going to accept a 7% rate for 30-year mortgages, you don't believe that junk. There is no chance at all that we're going to see that it's going to be acceptable. So we can put this down here of what the Federal Reserve has to do, what the government has to do, what the financial world has to do. We can put that there. The public's not going to agree to it. So now we got two things. We got a problem where the inventories were so low that the home building industry is not laying off people to help the problem. And we got a situation where the public is not going to pay the higher rate. It's an interesting time that we've got coming. Let me just take us out of here to Montgomery County real quickly. And let me show you here. We have Montgomery County back over here. And I just want to go and prove something to you. This right over here is 2019. And we did 1,805 starts over there. If I then come back, and I know we moved it, yeah, right here. We changed it 1 year. From 19 to 20, we went from 1,805 starts to 2,609. We went up. Well, if I come back and again put that same number over here, I repeated this chart. I just showed you the 2,609, see? And then he said, well, what about, that was 2020, and I know you can't see them from back there, but I'll tell you what the numbers are. In 21, what did we do? We went 2161. In other words, we went from 2669 down to 2161. What did I just say? Went from 19 at 1,800 to 2,600 in 2020, and then went to 2161. How's it going today? It's well, that's funny you should ask. That's right here. Here's Montgomery County for the whole year. That same 2161 number. But I only want to look for the first 5 months of the year. So here we did 877, and this year we did 991. In other words, we bottomed last year off, and we come back just a teeny bit. How are we faring? Well, last year we did 148 in May. This year 140. Last year at 200 we did 209, basically flat. 163, 221, 144, 141, 222, 280. If you really look at this carefully, way back in the beginning of last year, and by the middle for sure, we went flat. Nashville did the same thing. I could go show you the numbers. Nashville did the same. I want to take you to just past a lot of these things right over here. all the way. Now, I'm just dealing with Montgomery right now, okay? Let me just take you here. We are at 22% finished unoccupied in Montgomery County. Remember I said I want to be 24 to 28 right here. And I said to you that we are now at 13.1 nationwide, but by the end of this month, we'll be pushing 14 minimum. That's not so here. We're 23. There is something that happened, and I've seen it happen here before, where the builders love building specs versus pre-sales. It's almost if I could, it's like American Airlines in my opinion. If they didn't have to deal with the public, they would do wonderful. You know, it's like the builders, and I think in Montgomery County is a lot of this. If we didn't have to deal with people, good, no matter how much more fun it would be. But so we would rather build specs than to have to get a horse around and get caught. You see, so we'd rather not we'd rather build spec homes. And there's a tendency to push that. We had made a fair amount of money, you know, the COVID and all thing. And so we're pushing it here pretty heavily. 23%, by the way, is this close. I might be, I think, of all the markets we're in, the largest number I have of all the markets. Isn't that an amazing statement? You know what Memphis is? 5% of everything going, sitting there, finished and occupied. Here we're way back up. No, we're still fine. We're still fine, but we're almost at the low end of the range of 24 to 28. I'm just telling you, you've got to be a little bit careful, a little cautious. The fact that Montgomery County is up against the Nashville market with low inventories, all going to work to your favor. Let me just take us, maybe just one more chart, and I'll shut down. Let me take you all the way over here. Let me show you the land development side, and then I'll show you a forecast chart, and we'll quit. We have right now 1,906 developed lots on the ground in all the county. They're all hand counted. If you go back 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 years ago, it pretty much stayed in that 2,000, see 2,300, 23, 32, 29, 29. This is year over year, 29, 27, 19, 22, 24, 21, 19. There's something about Montgomery County on the land development side. It must be Jim developing land with the family developing land, but it stays stable. That is not so in any other market except Omaha, Nebraska. Everybody else is still coming down. It is unbelievable. The Nashville world without Montgomery County, between now and the end of 27, has to develop 128,000 lots. You say, well, it's going to be worse with this thing coming down. And okay, make it 118,000. You know, Montgomery County has a reasonable stability, and yet there was a time we were at 3,200. And we're at 1,900. We are still less than we need. So if you measure it based on what we need, not based on what we've got, I think you'd find that we're still low. What is the finished and occupied count? Well, let's look at the total homes going for a second. We were back over here at 691 homes under construction back in 18, and next year we're at 675, and then we went to 901 by June of 2020. And to 990, and we right now, June, it's 934 houses going out there, all hand counted. 934 of that number in Montgomery County, 715 are still being built, and 219 are finished and occupied. Watch this. The homes under construction count has gone from 427 to 715 in just 3 years. In other words, we've almost had a 100% increase in homes actually being built, putting on brick and siding that, and 219 finished and occupied. That count has come down from 260 2 years ago to 219. Still not major. What is right here? I have another one I want to show you, and that is, let me take you over here past all of these. This will make it better for you all the way through. This is all Montgomery County. I tell you, let me show you something on the way through. We finally figured out a way to tell you where you're going to run out of lots by part of county, by spot in the county, by price point. If you're going to develop land, you should know that in 2 years, where they're going to run out of lots to a price point. And you can calculate that, and we've got, this is the number of places, 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, 7, 8, about 10, or whatever it is, places. And let me just take you here, and I'll show you the forecast, and we'll quit. Now I'm going to show you this. Let me show you this. This is all of the metro market. These are the number of subdivisions that didn't start a house in the last 4 months. Now, I know you're not going to believe this. You're going to say, that stinker, he's up there telling me with all this thing and the need and the demand and all this stuff. And then he's telling me this, in Montgomery County, over here, 101st Airborne's here, right? We've got 25 subdivisions that didn't start a house in the last 4 months. I have 6 here, and I have 20 here, and 3. Well, we're talking 54 subdivisions, pretty close, that didn't start a house in the last 4 months. Nobody would believe that, right? I mean, can you imagine that? Anybody saying that? That is unreal. Well, if you take that 54 and looked at it this way, so I got 54 subdivisions that didn't start a house in the last 4 months. But here's the trick. You could have started one 5 months ago, or 6 months ago, or 7. You just didn't start one in 4 months. So then if you say, well, now Etzel, tell me how many subdivisions have no homes under construction, could have a few families living there, but they have at least 5 lots left. At least 5 lots left, but nothing going on. There's 24 subdivisions in one county. 24 subdivisions in this county that are sitting there with at least 5 lots that have nothing going on. Why wouldn't you go find out where these are? I'll tell you what you don't know is the reason he's getting out as county mayor is because he's going to go find these and buy these. Yeah. It's all financial. You thought he was going in that job to make money? He's getting out of it to make the money. That's what he's going to do. Let's get us out of here and look at the forecast thing. I'm going to pass all of these little hot dog charts right here. And I'm going to pass on Cheatham because we put that in here because the 2 counties alongside. Let me see if I can start here, right here. This is all of Montgomery County. I think in 23, we're going to build 2,180 houses. He said, well, how much is inflation going to affect that? I'm really close to messing with that, and it wasn't enough to make me change the numbers yet. But I think that if we were to say 100, 150 homes, that would be the most. But I think that we're here. I think we're going to be, see that? I'm at flat. That's where I'm at. And I think that it was possible we could do 12,700 houses here between now and the end of 27. And so let's take us out of here and all the way to here. This right over here is how it has gone. The reason there you have this erratic thing right over here is because a lot of it is changing now, but the 101st Airborne has had a lot of dominance over changing. It was this big and the market was this big. But over time, that big market is still big, but this one's gotten bigger. And there's a shift where the regular housing market is more dominant and less affected by the 101st Airborne. And I think that the reason that the commander of the 101st Airborne sends troops on and off that base is intentionally to screw up my charts. And so we have this. And what happened in 2020? We went boom. We did that right here. But absolutely nuts. And about 21, it came back to here. Because where's the trend? The trend line's right through here. It's not this thing. And we were coming back and saying, no, it's not going to stay there. Coming back to over here. And I think that we have yet 22. I think that it's quite possible a little teensy bit of upside. See that? Now, if inflation hits, here's what I think the inflation could do. But it's not there yet. Listen, we're watching every month the United States and every city we're in, all these states, that chart on the NFU and the finish on occupied homes. We will know by every city when it's going to get in trouble. I've never had that, Nelson, before. It is, you talk about gold mine, it's just crazy. Here's what I think you're going to have happen in all of next year, and this is my last chart, and I'm going to open for questions now. But in Montgomery County, I think next year, I think we're going to do this right there. Any questions? Everybody's taking pictures that I have the chart right. Any questions? You're going to have to raise, I'm an old person, you see. I know.
What keeps that there?
Why don't you go ahead now that everybody can hear you.
I'll ask that again. With the feds raising the interest price and the builders moving fast forward building houses, we're still doing the supply and demand for the high cost of supplies. Where does it equal out?
Well, here's a bunch of things in that are in transition right now. The high cost of supplies is changing, and we are cresting at a lot of our rates. Look at lumber. It's dropped dramatically, went up a little bit back up here, come back down, you watch. I think that I've already got builders that are renegotiating with a bunch of their stuff right now. And I think that you're going to find that pricing, I would guess between now and the end of the year, going to see some significant changes on that issue. And as far as the builders continuing to build and pushing product out there, I don't see that happening to the degree it was. Everybody that I do know does have a degree of caution, and they're watching their inventories, going to go back to more pre-sale, some of them, not all of them. I just think that the good news is this for you and for everybody. We are not in a crack where we have caught ourselves in a huge overbuilding. I mean, you talk about a gift to you as in the industry. It really is a gift. It's a gift to the subs, the suppliers, to everybody. We are not, normally the Federal Reserve, when you raise the rates, the intention is to get people laid off. That's not, they don't want to say it. Of course, you know what I mean? But that's the bottom line, is to get control of the doggone inflation, because they'll do anything, that Laurel said, they have no choice. And they don't have a choice. That's what they do. And they have a single tool, and that's the interest rates. They raise them. You go into the tank. You don't have the inventories. We're just not there. And I'll tell you what, Rob, just let me just show you the land site for your sake. Make believe nobody else is here. What normally happens, let me just clean this up. Normally happens when we get to the place where we're here, home building turns flat like this. Well, land development normally does this. That is not what's going to happen. It shouldn't happen this time. And I'll tell you what, Sammy's going to be the one that's going to solve the problem. You watch. We're going to be like this. Land development has to stay here. We are so stinking underdeveloped that even if you cut 20% out of the market, we're still in a crack. So the land development, instead of following the builders, has to go way up here. The only reason that won't happen is because the banks get scared, and they don't want to lend for land development. That's the only reason it's going to stop that growth. And and I'll be honest with you, this whole little thing we're going through is probably really, really good for the developers, because some of the craziness that I'm seeing coming out of planning commissions and some governmental things is just awful. I mean, I got places they want to pick the color of the brick on your houses. Literally. Now remember, a lot of states. Some of this foolishness that I see is just awful. You talk about people stepping out of their range of what they should be doing. Anyway, we could sit here forever.
Essel, I got one more.
Yep,
Still
okay.
over here. You kind of mentioned you think the rates are going to drop. Do you think it's going to be
Where
in
I'm,
20?
wait, I can't see you.
Yeah, it's still
Oh,
me.
I see, good,
You
okay.
mentioned maybe the rates are going to drop. What's your theory? Is it going to be January of next year, March of next year?
I think that before drops, we're going to see it go up. I really believe that the increase by the Fed is going to be 3/4 of a point. I'm going to be disappointed for the home building industry, and because I think it's an enormous mistake to believe that the public is going to be pushed above 6.25%. I think it's a really stupid move. But, you know, it's like my opinion ought to be yours, right? So what's going to happen? You're going to find that there's going to be, in the financial world, they're going to push the rates, They're going to find it ain't working. Look at the last go round. 4 times they bumped 6.1, 6.1, but they went above it. They came down, above, came down. And finally, they kind of gave up the ghost, and it started to, and then they were getting a lot of business again. I would be surprised if we see 6.75. If we do, it's going to be devastating. 7 is killer. I think that we are going to see these rates go up, and I will be surprised if we don't see this monkeying around at rates all the way through this time next year. And I think that between that time, you better have gotten you've got time now to get your stuff in order. Let me give you a shocker. I know it's not what you're here for, and I know we got to go. You would think that during all this time, that the builders would have figured out how to run their business really well. But that's not the case. How much you want to bet that they've actually gone backwards in how they can track their financials and know what's going on and their margins and how they track things? I've seen guys, listen, that doggone near one broke in this thing because they didn't know how to handle pricing when pricing was going up like nuts, and how they fixed their prices to some buyers. I had some that lost a ton of stinking money, $500,000, $750,000. I just think that you have a reprieve, and that might be anywhere from 8 to 12 months. Get your act together. Let me offer you one suggestion, and we're going to be done. And then I'm going to quit. Here's the one suggestion. You need to come to the place of saying to yourself, I'm going to make believe that I'm in a market that's 20% off from what it is today. How am I going to fare? How am I going to do business? How am I going to be okay? Nelson, come on and finish it up. Come on.
I just want to say thank you. Excuse me. Always fascinating to hear from Edsel and Laurel, and the breadth of knowledge that we've had here today is just tremendous. And I'm such a geek. My brain's going bananas from the things that she said. But thank you all for coming. And if you, he mentioned the troops, keep them in your thoughts and prayers as they have been deployed recently. But if you would leave, when you leave, if you would pick up your trash, that'll help Karen and Deb and I a lot. Thank you very much.